And it's my privilege to be to do the introductions here. And as you take your seats, I'd just like to really give a big shout out once again to our glorious leader, the wonderful Chris. From the very first time I met her in 2017 in Mozambique in South Africa, it was just, it was so clear from the very beginning, her commitment to the evidence base being so critical to the future of surf therapy and as one of the core founding principles of ISTO. And the fact that I was there as an academic in that very first meeting with the 8 orgs that were then on the ground was a testament to that as being a real foundational principle, and it still remains so. We had yesterday a fantastic keynote from Kristen about the wonderful work that she and Betty have been doing down in San Diego, and we're about to have another great keynote from another great researcher. But one of the things that academics don't necessarily get a lot of kudos for is their work. I mean, what do? We do research, we analyze it, we publish it in academic journals, and then we try and just work out how to get that message out to the broader population. But it's great to see when recognition does happen, and we have actually got the situation where Kristen has been in receipt of some wonderful recognition from her peers, and we're going to use this opportunity in front of your tribe to acknowledge this award. So earlier this year, Kristen was awarded the first prize across the whole Navy Research Center in San Diego for the best staff contribution for the work that she talked to us about. But get this, that then went on in the national competition across the whole of the Navy, and she was awarded second place in the country for the work that she was presenting yesterday. Congratulations, Kristen. Now, the reason we have these awards is because Betty was actually on hand to actually pick them up at the time. I'm sure Kristen has forgotten all about this, but I just thought it was a great opportunity to have this kind of public recognition for the wonderful work that you do.
So first, we're going to get
the 37th Annual Academic Research Staff Category presentation to Kristen.
And for the service members around here, you know what coins means. Not easy to get.
And the 37th Annual Navy-wide Academic Research Competition Award, second place to Kristen Walter. All right, so now it's a great pleasure, a really, truly great pleasure to introduce our next keynote speaker. It is just on almost exactly 5 years ago when Jamie and I had a conversation in a bar in South Africa where we talked about the possibility of him doing a Ph.D. And here we have come, the full circle, Dr. Jamie Marshall, the world's first Ph.D. in surf therapy. It was my absolute pleasure to be one of the supervisors. His main supervisors were at Edinburgh Napier University, but I was a external co-supervisor to his thesis. He did a fantastic piece of work. Now, if we were going to hear everything that he found during the course of his studies, you would be here for another day. But he's going to give us an absolute distillation and highlight of all the work that he's done, and he's going to do it without a single PowerPoint slide, which is even more amazing. Take it away, Jamie.
Phil, thank you. Yeah, that's a great setup, because actually, before I want to talk any of my research, I want to just talk a little bit about this room. I want to talk about ISTO, because I can't talk about my PhD without talking about ISTO. As Phil mentioned, the very idea of it started, it's always in a bar. Why is it always in a bar, these conversations? But the very idea of it started at ISTO, okay? The organizations I did research with, I met through ISTO. The support I got along the way, Kristen, I don't think this was probably an offhand comment to you, but the last time we had ISTO here, you gave my imposter syndrome monkey the kick I needed at that moment. You know, that ISTO is just this incredibly special thing. From a professional point of view, yes, look around the room right now. You have got clinicians, you've got researchers, you've got practitioners, you have got the best of the best in all their different fields, working together, sharing wildly. And I do a lot of work now in sport for development away from surfing, and I can say with confidence there is nothing like this out there. And it came up earlier today, actually. Organizations need to be looking at us, learning from us, and you know, they're never going to be as good as us, but trying their best. I'm actually speaking at a conference in Scotland when I get back, at the Scottish Mountain Bike conference, where they want to hear a bit about my PhD, but they want to hear about ISTO. They want to know, how did the surfers do this? Of all the people, how have the surfers gone and created this? Like, people are in shock. But yeah, so firstly, I just want to say, you know, it's a resource. Use it. We have all those resources on the website. You know, we have the bibliography. We have, and thank you for the website. We have the evaluation framework. We have all this amazing stuff on the website. But the real resource is all these people around you. And especially for those of you who are maybe a bit newer to the ISTO family, I just really encourage you, when you're facing those challenges, when you're not sure what to do, when you reach out. There are so many people that you wouldn't get access to normally that you can get access to through ISTO. And the other side of ISTO is ISTO's a family. I don't use that word lightly. PhDs are hard. They're really hard. Yeah, there's part of me is like, no one else should ever do one. It's just like, but alongside the sort of natural rigors of a PhD, I hit a few speed bumps along the way. COVID helped. But yeah, I hit some speed bumps in the way and actually ended up in a place where my own mental health took a dive, and ended up feeling and living the experiences that my participants were telling me about in all of these research interviews. And at that point, I was blessed to have some wonderful support structures. My smoke show of a fiance, who is the most patient woman on the planet. Some wonderful friends back home in Scotland. But I also had the people in this room. And this is the bit where I do a Chris and potentially get a bit teary. But there are people in this room who saved me at that point. You know, there are people in this room who had a WhatsApp conversation with me. There are people in this room who, when I was at the bottom of the bottom, did everything that we talk about doing in our surf therapy sessions every day. You all know who you are. I'm not going to point out to anyone. But yeah, this is a family. In one of the sessions at the workshops, we talked about who's doing surf therapy for all the surf therapy practitioners. It might not have been surf therapy, but my intervention was just the people in this room. And I just want to say a massive thank you to those people. And again, if you're new to this family, firstly, welcome, but dive on in. And if you're struggling a bit, reach out. We're all here. We're all here for you. So yeah, I couldn't start talking about my PhD without first talking about ISTO, because it has been entwined from the start. And there is a little bit of my story that comes before ISTO, and I think it's just important to ground what I'm going to talk to you about in that. So my background is, I've actually been involved in surf therapy my entire professional life. I went to university up at St Andrews and did medieval history. That's been particularly useful over the last couple of years. But I was working my summers down in Cornwall, ended up meeting Joe Taylor, who set up the Wave project down there, covered a few sessions for him because somebody was ill. There was no big plan or anything. I just covered someone who was ill and I needed some extra cash, and fell in love with it. And at that point, I took the Wave project's unique model up to Scotland and ran it for the first time ever in those ever slightly chillier waters. yeah, I had all those conversations that we've all talked about over these weeks, with the social workers and things. You want to do what with who in what temperature of water? And I set that up, and I took it from a pilot of about 20 young people, and it still exists today, run by my wonderful, dearest friend, Alison Young, and serves, hundreds of young people a year now throughout central Scotland. But I was seeing all these things that we've talked about all week. I was seeing the kids that the police were telling me, well, I'm not sure we want to send this person to you. They're going to disrupt your session, okay? They're a risk. They're going to run away. You're going to, yeah. And I just wasn't, when you got them into the water, it was like a different young person to the person on the page. I saw people who couldn't speak suddenly become one of the chattiest people in the water. I saw all this stuff, and I just want to know what the hell was happening. Like, what's going on here? And for that, one of my other wonderful supervisors, Brendan Ferrier, who couldn't be here. Lots of people have been wearing the thongs, the flip-flops on the stage right now. But this is actually a shout out to Brendan. Brendan does this year round in Scotland. So yeah, he's that professor, the one in the. But yeah, so that's a big shout out to him. Brendan actually introduced me to a master's program where I went and did physical activity for health, and that was my chance to try and understand, well, what's going on in the literature that's already out there. And I did a master's thesis working with the WAVE project, but I still wasn't happy. I still hadn't found the answer. I didn't understand what was going on. And that was really where the PhD came in. That's where that conversation with Phil happened back in South Africa. That's where that conversation with Andy happened to make it a reality. And a huge thank you, Andy, for the fiscal component is there. It wouldn't have been possible without that. So the PhD, this is it. It's got my name on it, okay, but this belongs to all of you. Andy, Chris, Phil, Kristen, all of you, everyone who's running surf therapy, this belongs to you. I'm going to make sure there's a link to it in the Hoover app at some point in the next 48 hours. Exactly like Kristen said, avoid the analysis section. Enjoy the discussion, okay? But yeah, this is for every single one of you. And I was having dinner with Jacob last night, just the best guy. And he said, what's your dream with this? That guy asks the best questions, doesn't he? I think he did that in one of the sessions. But what's your dream with this? My dream is one of you takes something out of this and uses it to help one person. That's it. That's all I want. Okay? So yeah, I hope it is useful. There's some typos. I'm super dyslexic. This has been through so many rounds of edits, and I found a typo last night. But yeah, that's it. And now actually on to what it says in there. There's quite a lot in there. So I'm gonna try and draw out, like, firstly what we did, what we found, and what the most important findings are, and what they mean to you guys as practitioners, as clinicians, as funders. What do these things mean? So what we actually wanted to do is try and understand how surf therapy does the amazing things that we all know it does. I wanted to work very closely with a small number of organizations and work with their participants, do in-depth interviews with participants to understand their experience of the projects, because their perspective is the most important perspective at all. Most of the literature that was out there on surf therapy was experts looking in, and what was really missing was that engagement and discussion with the participants themselves to understand what they've experienced, which to me I think is probably the most important thing we need to learn from. So I worked with a number of amazing organizations. Firstly, big shout out, I know there's no one from here today, but to the WAVE project. And that was my master's thesis, but I'm including it there because that was almost like the pilot that then led to the other studies in the PhD. It was kind of the proof of concept for the PhD. And the learnings from that contribute to this wider discussion. I work with the amazing local Jimmy Miller Memorial Foundation. It's great to be back. The last time I was here, I was working with you guys, and that was really cool. I work with Joel and the team from Ways of Wellness. And I work with Ways for Change, actually not at their site in South Africa. I work with their site in Liberia. And Krista, if you're watching from Live for More in New Zealand, I'm still coming for you. I was supposed to work with those guys, but COVID shut the New Zealand border 3 days before I was due to land. So yeah, that's coming. We're going to make it happen. Okay. And what we wanted to do is understand what was going on in each of these programs and look for what was similar and what was different. and I'm going to just explain one jargon word. The things we were looking for are what we call mechanisms. So they're the things that are leading. If we've got our surf therapy here and the amazing impact we all know and talk about here, what's in the middle here? Okay, what's leading from that to that? And that's what I'm going to refer to as mechanisms throughout this talk. And so we wanted to explore these mechanisms within individual orgs, but then as part of the PhD, actually compare that and see, are there things that are maybe common to all of surf therapy? Are there things that are more contextual? We didn't know day one of it could have been everyone's different, which would have made this talk much harder. And what we found was there were a couple of core mechanisms. We called them core mechanisms. These were things that seemed to happen in every single surf therapy site I visited. There were also some contextual mechanisms that maybe depended on the modality of the surf therapy that was being delivered or the context. And then all of those mechanisms were framed in population specificity. I should have picked a better word for that, shouldn't I? But what that means is every intervention we work with, the people running the interventions were experts in the populations they served, often being members of those populations themselves, okay? Because even the core mechanisms had to be appropriate for the populations you're working with. Even the core mechanisms have to be adapted to make sure they're suitable for who we're wanting to work with. I'm going to work through a few of the core mechanisms right now, and you're going to have to bear with me and be very rude. I'm actually going to pull my phone out because I'm just going to explain why. As I mentioned, most of my data involved research interviews with participants, and there's a few quotes and things I want to share, and for me it's very important that I actually give you the full quote, word for word, out of respect for the participants and their experiences and what they shared with me, because it's a privilege to access that information. It's very important for me that I'm able to give that word for word, and also I didn't want Chris to shout at me for paper like she did at Kristen, so, I'm going to pull out my phone in a second. But before we do that, we're going to do some research right here, right now in this room, okay? So firstly, if you take part in this, you're giving me consent. Very important we get our ethics right. Secondly, can I ask everyone to close their eyes? And everyone, you have to do this. Otherwise, it's not a trusting space for everyone else. So everyone has to do it. AV team, can you keep the camera on me, please? Out of respect. I don't want anyone to see. And if you're at home, play along. Firstly, I want to ask you, who in the room surfs regularly, semi-regularly? Put your hands up. Okay, it can be body surfing, can be bodyboarding, anything like that. Cool. You're my population. Okay, you're my sample. Okay, now put your hands down. Who in this room has felt uncomfortable in the surf at some point? Okay, cool, put your hands down. And the next bit is really important, why I want everyone to close their eyes. If you do not feel comfortable taking part in any of these questions, please just don't take part, that's fine. Who in this room has felt uncomfortable in the water because of their ability and like how good they surf in inverted commas? Okay. Who in the water has felt uncomfortable because of something to do with their race or ethnicity? Okay. Put your hands down. Who in the water has felt uncomfortable because of their gender? Okay, put your hands down. And in all of those circumstances, who has not felt comfortable in the water because of the actions of another person? Okay, put your hands down and open your eyes. I'm going to give you the results now. We'll skip analysis. I've done it in here. The prevalence of how you felt uncomfortable in all those different circumstances was shockingly high. Shockingly. Okay? It was 90 to 100%, and obviously that's accounting for, different sort of subpopulations within that sample, but shockingly high. And as surfers, as a surf therapy sector, we have to acknowledge that, we have to own that, and we have to respond to that. Okay? The lineup is not a safe space. That's a fact. We've discussed that throughout this. Actually, we didn't plan any of this, but so many of the talks have spoken to this over the past 2 days. Even this morning, talking about how the lineup is a colonized space. We have to understand, respect, and act on that. Because all of those situations we've described there are not conducive to healing. They're not conducive to what we call a therapeutic space. And that brings us on to the first core mechanism, which is the buzzword of this conference. It's the word that's come up the most in all of the different things we've done. That's the idea of safe spaces. Or to be specific, physical and emotional safe spaces. Physical safe spaces are very important as well as emotional safe spaces. I remember one of the Wave Project volunteers just saying, I know when I'm surfing, no one's going to beat me up, which is a little bit shocking, but that's the lived reality of many of our participants, and it's important to remember that. So I'm just going to a participant. So the first quote I just want to share around safe spaces is from one of the wonderful Jimmy Miller participants, who said, I've been isolating myself for 7 years, and I began to realize that there's actual people out there that care about me and I'm going to be safe around. Okay, and that was their experience of surf therapy. The idea that there are spaces, there are communities, there are people where they can feel safe and where there is genuine intention for care. We had a wonderful workshop session led by Ben and Joel on, in much more depth, what those safe spaces look like. Keywords around consistency, around, there was so much in that to unpack. And again, these are the nuances I wish I could be up here for a long time longer and talk to you about, but there is so much nuance around safe spaces, and there's not enough literature about it. We need to do more research around what safe spaces are, because they're important not only in surf therapy, they're important in clinical spaces. They're important in any kind of community-based mental health approach. And if we don't understand the core principles of a safe space, how the hell are we supposed to deliver them? And how the hell are we supposed to then subvert these non-safe spaces like the lineup and change them for the better? And there's one thing that's come up. Oh, there we go. There's one thing that's come up quite a lot around vulnerability. One of the core components of safe space seems to be vulnerability. Now, of course, I've been an academic and put a really dry definition on that instead of vulnerability, which is much more powerful and emotive. But within our work, we called it participatory facilitation. And that's the idea that the people, you guys who are facilitating surf therapy, are doing it as participants, as active participants, as well as your roles as facilitators. Just to really sum that up, there's a quote here from a Ways of Wellness participant who said, they would talk about semi-personal experiences or things they've been through, which was super comforting in the sense that when you go to a psychologist, you don't get that personal. Whereas the WOW guys were I went through this. And they wouldn't go into a lot of depth or anything, but it made me feel more like a conversation and like a friendship group than a psychologist's office. We've talked a lot around stigma. The Surf World guys really went into that in some great depth. We talked a lot about stigma, how we overcome that. It's a huge threat to vulnerable people accessing mental health services. So if we're able to take, especially in, for example, Ways of Wellness case where they're taking clinicians to the beach, that young person didn't seem to be aware he was talking to clinicians on the beach at WOW. Mental health by stealth, genius, okay? But yeah, the way the WOW facilitators were able to open up and make their participants feel comfortable, huge. And we've heard that all over, talking about being vulnerable and sharing, and just, you did it for me. So, it's what it's all about, okay? I'm going to move on to, because like I said, I could be up here a long time. And the other thing I want to bear in mind, safe spaces for me are the foundation of everything else that I found, okay? As I go through some of these next core mechanisms, I do want you to just think about would this be possible without the safe space? Because to me, the answer is very clear. The next one is mastery. I don't know if anyone's heard of mastery and self-efficacy theory. Super established sort of trope in mental health and psychology. Okay, this idea of showing people they can do something. I've got this quote, and it's just beautiful because it's so simple, but it just cuts to the core. And this is a young Wave Project participant who said, well, I went surfing and did that, and if I can do that, chances are I can do this other scary thing. Okay? And it's so true. It wasn't about learning to surf. It was learning they were able to learn to surf. It was learning they were able to do this thing they perceived as really difficult. And if I can do that, I can do, maybe that young person is then re-engaging with school a bit better. Or maybe they are attending their, clinical consultations better. Or actually, I remember having this conversation with Jimmy Miller participant who really struggled with getting out the car at Walmart. He's like, come on, if I can, go over the falls at Manhattan Beach, I can get out the car at Walmart, So it's really powerful. It sounds really simple and small. But yeah, it's so important. And actually, surfing as a vehicle is really good for this because we can take our time. We can go nice and slow. I can tell you as a Wave Project facilitator, the number of times I was building sandcastles on the beach instead of surfing. And that's because we were meeting our participants where they're at. You know, we're letting them dictate the pace. We're always giving them the chance to push themselves. We're always encouraging, well, do you want to give this a go? If not, it's fine. We're encouraging them to go at their own pace, but that helps them achieve the mastery that they want to achieve and can benefit from. Sorry, my phone keeps locking, which is not ideal. And on top of that, I want to just dip into a few contextual learnings that come out of this. So one contextual element that came out of the Ways for Change study around mastery was this idea of enriched learning. Learning in, you know, a very pretty, but learning like this, where I'm speaking to you in a lecture setting, is not really the best way to learn. And something Ways for Change do really well, we've already heard wonderful presentation. I was late for it, appalling show on my behalf, but talking about the bananas culture and embodying that. And something that the Ways for Change do really well is they use the surf environment to really entrench the learnings from their bananas culture. So the Take 5, which some of you did during the workshops, the guys in Liberia, one of the kids in Liberia was telling me, I can't remember if I have a quote on this. Yeah. There was this time when I fell in the waves, and the wave broke over me, and I fell in the water. And I take my Take 5, and I get back on the board and release all the stress on my mind. The power of that is they were reacting to a real stressor. When you are not used to surfing, even when you've been surfing for a long time, when you unexpectedly end up under the water, it's pretty shocking. Your heart rate goes up. It's like a real-world activation of your stress profile, okay? And if you can then practice what you've learned in reaction to a real response rather than just imagining it in a classroom, that learning is so much more powerful. And the Ways for Change coaches in Liberia were actively celebrating this every time they saw it. They were encouraging the young people when they fall off, do your Take 5, get control of your breathing again. And when the kids did it, they celebrated it. And I have to put my phone down because this was one of my favorite. One of the annoying things about transcribing and writing is you can't film it. But I had this amazing moment where one of the Ways for Change guys told me, well, you know, I took that learning and now I use it in the community. And he said there was this one time where I was getting in a fight. And, you know, the fights for these kids are scary because, you know, there's a lot of knives around. There's a lot of other, you know, fight is not just like a schoolyard scrap. It can be very serious. And he was getting into this fight, and he's sort of like fronting up a bit. And he said, I went like this. No. This is not bananas. And he did his Take 5, and he breathed, and he got control of himself, and he walked away from that situation. So powerful. But that kind of learning that has been entrenched so deeply that it goes into that really stressful situation, I do think a lot of that comes from that sort of enriched learning environment that Ways for Change we're doing by using the ocean there. And we'll come back to talking about surfing as a vehicle. Okay. And the other big thing that came up in every single site was this idea of respite. This idea of leaving our worries on the beach. Who here, I think you can probably leave your eyes open this one, who here likes to go surf to leave, you know, all their stress on the beach? There's not many universal truths in surfing, but that might be one of them, okay? I've got a Wave Project participant who said it means a lot to me because the things that happen at home, different things, it just takes your mind off. It's amazing coming down here. It just makes you forget about everything for a good 2 hours. Now, that is short term, and actually, I mean, you couldn't have set me up better for this. You know, that we saw that from my qualitative world, we saw that in the quantitative world with the wonderful presentation yesterday. We saw that change within the session, but it wasn't necessarily sustained, okay? But that's okay, because there are other things that come out of that. And one thing, and this is not going to sound like the most scientific word in the world, but this idea of hope. When you are struggling with your mental health, things can feel very hopeless. I can speak to this firsthand. And you need things to remind you that beyond what you're experiencing, there is another life. There is things worth living for. This is a JMMF participant speaking about hope. You can't wait for the next one because you know if you're having a rough time or you know you're suicidal or if you're injured or whatever, you know that when you're going down to the gym, you're going to have a good day when you go. Okay? So the actual feeling, you know, the fact that I had JMF participants talking about when I'm down surfing, it's one of the only times I know an intrusive thought or a flashback isn't going to come. It's the only sort of space I know those things aren't going to happen to me. Now, that space is 2 hours or a couple. With the Jimmy, it's more like half a day, and the pizza on the... I love pizza on the beach. That blew my mind as a researcher coming from Scotland, sitting down and pizza on the beach. Amazing. But those couple of hours, you know, we can't do that for the rest of our lives. But what the participants are taking away is that hope, and that restored hope in a future where they can I don't want to even say overcome their diagnosis, because that's not necessarily the appropriate language, but they can learn to live with their diagnosis better. And what do we think is doing that? Someone once said, I don't know if it was a marketing thing, but someone once said only a surfer knows a feeling. Okay? What crazy idiot decides to try and unpack that through research? But we did come across something quite interesting. And I know some of you guys talk about this, and that's this idea. All of the participants, when they were talking about why they thought they could leave their problems on the beach, they started talking about certain indicators that triggered in my mind something called flow states. Now, some of you may have come across flow states before. It's a psychological state. The briefest I can sum up, it's the psychological state of being in the zone. Okay, you're completely lost in whatever activity you're doing. And I'm just going to give you, this is again a JMF participant, but he's describing how he feels when he's surfing. He just says pure happiness. Unless you've done it, it's a feeling that's very hard to describe. It's like everything slows down. Your entire life just not so much pauses, but is in slow motion as you go through the section. And it's just incredible. In that, he's actually describing 4 or 5 of the key indicators of flow states. Okay? One of the most famous ones being this temporal distortion, this idea of time slowing down. Again, hands up, who has looked at their watch in the water and been like, bugger, I need to get back in? I thought I'd only been serving for 10 minutes. I've been out for 3 hours. Okay? Again, universal truths a little bit there. But the really exciting thing about that is we know how to encourage flow states. We know how to set the parameters to encourage flow states. And flow states are not limited to surfing. Again, thank you for setting me up yesterday, Kristen. You know, we can encourage flow states through all kinds of other activities, including arts and music. It's not just sport. Okay, so if we can actually link these flow states to that antidepressant, that anxiolytic effect that we're seeing within these studies, maybe through a mixed method study and collaboration, it's incredibly powerful for the whole sector. Not just our sector, but lots of other sectors. So yeah, I'm coming for you guys. That's gonna happen. Okay. So yeah, that's really exciting. We are looking to confirm that. And the final one I just want to really talk about in terms of core mechanisms, this idea of social connections. Again, social support is just such an established trope within any kind of psychology or thing. And I just want to read this one. This was a JMF participant again. And I'm just going to, not a trigger warning so much, but if anyone wants to earmuffs, there's a couple of F-bombs in this. But again, I want to be authentic to the participant experience and what they've described to me. So yeah, earmuffs if you want. I was fucking alone, bro. I was really fucking alone, and I'm not anymore. Yeah, you know, just being able to go out with other people who actually like want me there. This is just night and day from how my life used to be. How powerful is that? A lot of the actual diagnoses of a lot of mental health conditions, the idea of isolating and avoidance is actually part of the symptoms. You know, if you're actively avoiding, it's one of the things that comes under diagnostic criteria for a lot of mental health illness. And yeah, just seeing the power that social connections. I'm just laughing because in my head, when I did have slides, there was the cheesiest picture of Joel with one of his participants here. And again, it just sums up like that social connection, that positive support. But again, I want you to reflect. Could we have that picture of Joel with that cheesy smile if he wasn't actively holding a really, really strong safe space? You know, could those individuals get that mastery, build their self-efficacy, build their confidence to the point where they can get out of the car at Walmart? Could they do that without a safe space? Okay. So for me, while we have some core mechanisms, there's one foundational mechanism, and that's safe spaces. Quite frankly, if you're not holding a safe space, you're not doing surf therapy. It's simple as that. And just a little nuance on that. Breaking down social barriers is hugely important as well. Actually, I think there was a really good question about this in the Surf World presentation around breaking down social isolation barriers. And again, one of the Jimmy Miller participants said it eliminated that whole us and them thing. You know, us versus the civilians. It was more just like us. And it's a beautiful, beautiful sort of quote, but it makes us think, yes, that works in a sort of military civilian space, but there's so many other spaces that works. Some of my participants with Ways of Wellness really talked around that stigma around engaging with clinical mental health, and actually breaking down that safe space enabled them to engage with different kinds of people and you know, meet other people and engage with surfers who they all thought were just these, you know, out of reach people they could never have these social relationships with. So yeah, these positive social connections, again, probably not surprising, but the way they were done were exceptional. And that's the learning we need to take away. Where am I at? Yeah, just on time, love it. The thing I wanted to wrap up with is looking at exactly kind of what I just said there. If you're not holding a safe space, are you doing surf therapy? The International Surf Therapy Organization has defined surf therapy as a method of intervention that combines surf instruction, surfing, and structured individual and/or group activities to promote physical, psychosocial, and psychological well-being. There's a key word in there for me, and that's structures, or structure, okay? Just taking someone surfing is not surf therapy. And that's something we need to recognize, you know? Just taking someone surfing, just taking them into that unsafe space, that thing we've all recognized as an unsafe space, the contested lineup. And if you want to read more about that, Eski Britton's got a wonderful book chapter. I'll ask her if I can share it in Hoover. That's called Contested Spaces in the Lineup, that really explores all those tensions that exist within the lineup. Okay? But what's been so evident throughout this conference and throughout ISTO's relatively short life is that the therapeutic structures that are being developed within the surf therapy world, whether they're clinically led or whether they are community led, clinically informed, all these different things are exceptional. And one of the reasons that surf therapy is getting to where it is we are so willing to share how we're doing that, our experiences of getting that wrong. That's so important, okay? And that's why surf therapy, in my opinion, is moving forward. Maybe we'll address that definition at some point again, but actually for a first go, and that first go was done before this research was out there, pretty good effort. Okay. So, yeah, that's some of the key findings from my PhD. As you see, it's quite thick. There's all kinds of other nuance. Now, I do encourage you, not because it's mine, because there is some really interesting nuance there. Go read it, go flick through it. Find the stuff related to the population that you serve and have a look. And yeah, I'll probably just finish it there and say, I'm going to address the questions in the Hoover app in time. But I just want to say, as well as the questions in this room we're going to have now, and I hope I've left enough time for some good questions, please do reach out. You're all part of the ISTO family now, and I've reached out to lots of people, and they've done incredible things for me, both professionally and personally. And I say this as an open invitation, and I know that all the other researchers will do this as well. Please, if you have any further questions, do reach out. Get in touch. And yeah, so we're going to have a little Q&A now, but the Q&A can go on till where we go in 2023? But yeah, so thank you very much, and yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Jamie, for giving us a snippet, just and a summary of the wonderful work that you've done during the course of your PhD. Now we have a mic here on the floor, so questions from the floor for Jamie.
Thank you. Is that on? Yeah, thank you, Jamie. That was great. My question is, a lot of those core mechanisms you would have been aware of before in terms of hypothesis, or people have hinted at those, but I was just wondering what from your research surprised you the most, that you learned that you didn't really know about before or hadn't really considered, and it sort of struck you doing the work. I think that would be interesting to me anyway.
I think if I'm honest, it's around safe spaces. And what was maybe not shocking to me was not necessarily the nuances around how they're delivered, but actually how little literature exists exploring that, how little has been shared around how we hold a safe space. And there's so many nuances around that. There's definitely not one answer. There's all kinds of contextual manners in which you have to sort of alter your safe space. There's probably some core truths in there as well, but we need to explore that further. I was receiving a couple of consent forms today for a safe space I'm doing to try and at least start having that discussion more robustly. There are bits and pieces within some of the therapeutic literature. There's bits and pieces within other sectors, but we need to bring all that together and really explore and really set some best practice around what safe spaces look like. that is informed in a robust manner. It's not just someone's opinion. Because yeah, like we say, the experts in safe spaces are the people who have benefited from them rather than people like, well, actually saying that, ISTO has been my safe space. And I think that has spoken to some of my beliefs around safe spaces. But yeah, we need to be doing that research around what safe spaces look like for the people who need them and who benefit from them the most. So I think rather than anything that actually came out of our research, it was what hadn't been explored in depth enough yet. And still, in my opinion, has not been explored enough.
Thank you, and thank you, Jamie. So I think a common theme that has been recurring this conference has been safe spaces. Right? We get it through all different kinds of modalities. What I'm curious about in your research is, have you found any common disruptors of safe spaces? Maybe mistakes that facilitators make, things that you might easily overlook but can mess up the whole process?
The lineup. I mean, for me, there's so many external things that actually can come in. It can be tiny things. It can be, I mean, the thing is, safe spaces are so contextual, and some disruptors are not possible to avoid. For example, again, some of these memories are probably coming back so strongly because I'm here, but one of my JMMF participants was talking to me about helicopters. We live in LA, you can't get away from helicopters, there's always helicopters going over, but those helicopters were a constant trigger for him. And actually that quote really came out of some of the respite research, because he was saying the first time he didn't realize a helicopter had gone over was when he was surfing. So I almost don't think there are like super common ones, because it speaks a lot to that population specificity. Oh, nailed it. It speaks a lot to that, having that in-depth understanding of what your participants require and what they need, and then responding to that. I do think there are some, rather than some key disruptors, I do think there's some core parts, and I think we got into depth with Ben and Joel on that earlier in the week a lot. But I mean, for me, one that I think is overlooked is consistency. It's probably not the sexiest of the sort of bits around safe spaces, but if you're inconsistent, it's such a disruptor. Joel talked about a bit with the energy. Even if your energy is inconsistent, if you show up one session at like 110%, you show up in the next session at 30%, you know, participant can be like, did I do something? Or, you know, what's going on with them? Or, you know, so I think that's a big one. I think the other one probably, and actually it's interesting that this was a word that came up a lot in, for example, Andy and Vipe's discussion, was this idea around being authentic. A lot of the populations we serve have a keen nose for bullshit. Simple as that, okay? If you're being fake with them, if you're putting on a fake front with them, they can tell, and they are going to disengage with you. I always remember the Wave project, and actually just being like, you know, I need to be very aware that there's actually a really cool anecdote I love, around a young person who, he asked me one day in the middle of a session, how do you pay all these people? Because we had all our volunteers out. And he's like, how do you pay all these people? Are you minted or something? Like, can you, and he wanted me to buy him something. But I said to him, no, man, they're all volunteers. They're all here because they want to come surfing with you. And it blew his mind. And this young person, for perspective, had been in care all their life. And probably 80 to 90% of the adult interactions they had on a daily basis were paid. And it just blew his mind that these people wanted to be there and surf with him. You know? The moment one of those people isn't being genuine with him, he's going to pick it up. And that moment we've got right there is lost. So, yeah, there's quite a lot of them there. And that's why I think this safe space stuff, it's not as simple as just being nice. Like, I think, and that's a challenge. I think people can think, holding a safe space, I've just got to be nice. It's not enough. There's a lot there. And again, I encourage anyone who can reflect on what we discussed in the workshop, and we had a bit more time to focus on that. And I'm sure this is something that will come up in future ISTOs, you know, as we unpack this further and we share best practice over the next 5, 10, 20, 100 years.
Let me see if I can frame this question in a way that makes sense. We've talked a lot about, and over the last few days, you know, community, isolation, and how feeling alone can really affect someone. And we've talked about stressors and how positive stressors can be really influential. And I think our humanity at its core knows that we need community. Did you see any themes around the idea of these stressors, these positive stressors of surfing and community provide that benefit, that long-term benefit? I think we know that we kind of bond over traumas, but in this case, they're positive stressors. And what do you see if you do see themes like that?
I mean, I think one of the main things around that was this idea of actually some of the flow and respite stuff and sharing in that experience through the focus that was demanded. So rather than, I mean, I'll be honest, in our research, we didn't come up much on the sort of positive risk-taking side of things, which I know is an existing trope, and it may be that my questions weren't right. And, you know, this is the thing. It was very exploratory research. My whole process, for anyone who's interested, it was based in grounded theory. So incredibly open-ended questions to ensure we're really going to the places that the participant wanted to go. And the idea of positive risk-taking didn't come up. But what did come up is building community around these positive experiences, and that rather than the positive risks, the overcoming challenges together, and then building that mastery together, that did come up a lot. And actually, I know specifically, you know, a lot of organizations have structures they put in place to encourage that. I think Waves for Change did one of the most obvious ones, which is like pair surfing, which is where the participants teach each other. They get guidance from the surf coaches, but they teach each other and they go through that process and they support each other through those challenges. And actually, even before that, they do pair floating, because a lot of the kids are, you know, not super confident in the water yet, or haven't spent a ton of time in the water yet. And instead of the facilitator, you know, doing that, they're really supporting peer support, community support within that. And that leads to that bananas community that Waves for Change talk about so passionately. So, yeah, we didn't see a ton in the realms of positive risk as much, but we did see a lot in around sort of strengthening those communities through those shared experiences that were maybe more positive. I do come from a very positive psychology sort of world, so that might explain why that happened. But yeah, that's how I could answer that, I think.
So you may have obviously been here for the talk on the Aloha Award. One of the things that we obviously want to do is get the science out there, but more importantly, find a way to translate that science into, you know, simple best practices that can be disseminated widely, training programs, et cetera. That's one of the things that we want to do. So question, how do we actually make that happen? How do we translate your science into training programs, best practices, and disseminate all of that knowledge?
That's a really good question. There's an answer in what framed those mechanisms there, and that's around population specificity. You guys are going to try and make me say that as many times as possible, aren't you? It's really important to bear that in mind. I don't think we can treat surf therapy as something that we can do prescriptively around the world, not in terms of getting prescriptions, but in terms of like everyone following the same crib sheet. We can't do it because the context is different, the populations are different. You cannot write a program for veterans on the West Coast of the United States that's going to do the same thing for children in a post-conflict zone. We need to have the space to adapt some of these core elements and really allow our practitioners, clinical or community-based, to be the experts they are in their local context with their populations. So for me, it's around building that knowledge around those sort of core ideas and then entrusting people to responsibly take advantage of that. And we need to do that better. And all the research is going to nod now. This is on us as well. We need to be doing lay summaries for every single one of our papers. We need to be getting onto, as much as I hate doing it, podcasts and things like that. We need to be speaking. Some of the work I did recently was funded by this Swedish postcode lottery. And we sort of like, in the process of trying to get the funding, we're like, oh, we could maybe do a webinar or two. But I'm so glad they called us out on that, because we had all kinds of different people engaged with that webinar, and then go on and take little pieces that they can then build into their own programs or into their research questions or whatever it may be. So people like yourself at the Aloha Awards, giving the platform to researchers and setting us the challenge to sit on that podcast. You guys are doing your TikTok. It sounds like that was happening after yesterday. You know, your YouTube. Yeah, your YouTube and TikTok stuff. Set us that challenge because we need to do it. And it's not always something we want to do, but we need to do it because, you know, you could write the best study in the world, but if it sits in a journal behind a paywall that no one ever reads, what's the point?
So just to follow up, I mean, apart from, I mean, obviously we're going to be working with ISTO to support some of this research. Is there anything specific that, I mean, you speaking on behalf of researchers and the scientific community, is there anything specific that we can do to help?
Yeah, I think set us that challenge. Give us platforms that then we look stupid if we don't, take those opportunities. Set us that challenge. So definitely give us that platform and use your reach because you are reaching lots of people we wouldn't normally get the chance to reach. And especially like collaborating through ISTO. We've done webinars with ISTO that have reached all kinds of people and led to all kinds of really cool conversations. So set us that challenge because within academia itself, there is this thought that a lot of the time, and actually most of the academics in this room aren't like this, and that's brilliant, but we're sometimes in the minority. The idea that a publication is the end is wrong. But because of the way that academia is often funded and the way that you score your points, as it were, as a researcher in your career, a lot of time the publication is seen as the end goal. My personal belief as a practitioner, before I was a researcher, is that's the starting point. At that point, your research has been reviewed, refined. It's been through the rigors of review too. We all know that feeling. But it's been accepted by your peers to the point where you then need to tell everyone about it. You need to get that press release out. You need to get on the news. You need to get on, it's the starting point. It's the foundation for building that house. So the more you can give us that platform, and set us that challenge, because like I say.
Sorry, just to challenge you a little bit, you said it sounds like there's very little that every single surf therapy organization has in common. But one of the things that came out was this notion of a safe space. So, I mean, maybe I'll push back a little bit and say, what about creating a scientific definition and best practices around what constitutes and how you create a safe space? It would seem that would apply to everybody. So maybe that's not the only thing. Maybe there's one or two other things that are, in the overlapping concentric circles.
No, I love that, and I love that pushback. That's what we're trying to do a bit with the safe space study I'm doing at the moment, at least within that sort of sport for development world. We're trying to understand that safe space study is working with coaches specifically, not the directors, not the founders. It's working with the coaches on the ground to understand what are the steps they are taking to hold safe spaces in some of the most challenging places to hold a safe space in the world. Some of the consent forms coming in this morning were a discussion with an amazing organization called Elman Peace in Somalia. So they're based in Mogadishu. They run some really cool surf therapy, but they actually do a sort of multi-sport approach, but building in these safe spaces and things. So yes, I think we can build these guidelines, like you say, and best practice, but I will never advocate for like a prescriptive approach where we're trying to impose on people. And I think that's a subtle difference, but it's very important to recognize that in that process. And yes, more research needs to be done in that vein. I'm trying my best. But yeah, there is certainly space for that. And yeah, hopefully we can get it done. I mean, we've got a room full of academics and practitioners here. Yeah, hopefully we can get it done.
Just a comment from me. I think one of the things that really is an overarching theme out of your research, and this has only just occurred to me as I've heard you talk today, is that really the very principle that you've used, which was this grounded approach, the focus on the participants, listening to their story in depth, making them, in fact, the architects of where your thesis went and how it derived. I mean, that's encapsulated in a broader movement within research now, which is co-design. The idea that the populations you are trying to serve are the experts in whatever, setting that is. And really, researchers in the past have always said, I'm the expert, I'm the boss, I'm going to ask the questions, I'm going to develop the hypothesis, I'm going to do the research, and I'm going to tell you the answers. And that we have to reframe that. And Jamie's research, as a whole, is part of that process, part of that journey, saying, okay, we need to listen to the people we're trying to serve. They do have expertise. We don't have all the answers. They actually have all the knowledge, the lived experience, the understanding. We have to develop our methods to be able to tap into that knowledge and understanding and make sure that whatever we do is consistent and validated and sought by the people we're trying to serve. That way we're going to get programs that really engage and do have the maximum impact. And yes, as Jamie says, what that will look like in different settings and different contexts is going to be different. But I think as an overarching principle, that's something that I think many of the programs here do extremely well. But for any new people coming into the field and looking at, what do I do? How do I start my journey in surf therapy? I would say that's a really important principle. Get to a deep understanding of where your participants come from, and you'll then come up with the best possible way of delivering surf therapy to whatever population it is you're trying to serve.
Thank you so much, Phil. Yeah, that's spot on. I believe we're going to move on into something a lot more fun. But yeah, can I get the Waves for Change team to come up here and lead us in an exercise?
Chandre in the house.
Okay, sure. I'm definitely not going to speak about any research. I'm going to do something very fun. So this is, we call it an energizer, and it's something that we do with our kids back in South Africa. So can everyone please get up? Okay, I'm just going to use the mic to explain, and then I'm going to take it out of my hand because it feels a bit awkward. So we're going to be doing some actions. It's going to require you to move your body a bit, okay? And you're going to have to repeat after me. So if I shout out thumbs up, everyone shouts out thumbs up, okay? Make sense? Thumbs up? Thumbs up. Okay, perfect. I'm going to teach you a word in isiXhosa, and I'm going to say it, and then you can repeat after me again. Ajiga Jaiva. Ajiga Jaiva. Okay, perfect. You got all the words. That's good. Thumbs up! Thumbs up! Thumbs up! Elbows in! Elbows in! Knees together! Knees together! Ajiga Jaiva! Ajiga Jaiva! Ajiga Jaiva! Ajiga Jaiva! Okay, you have to be loud. I'm going here. Okay, thumbs up! Thumbs up! Thumbs up! Thumbs up! Elbows in! Elbows in! Knees together! Knees together! Ajiga Jaiva! Ajiga Jaiva! Ajiga Jaiva! Ajiga Jaiva! Thumbs up! Thumbs up! Thumbs up, elbows in, knees together, toes together, ajiga jaiva, ajiga jaiva, ajiga jaiva, ajiga jaiva. Thumbs up, elbows in, knees together,